Hi, everybody. How's it going? All right. So, it's going to be maybe a bit of a change of pace from what you've heard today. When I was asked to talk, originally, I think there was some confusion. Do I talk about something technical, or do we go for something completely different? And let's see if completely different works, shall we? All right. So theory of groups, and not group theory, not rings and fields, not cryptography, but building and growing engineering teams and cultures that are functional and inclusive. Elaine told me to put that in. Everything you see here I'm going to publish afterwards. As with everything that I've put out, you should feel free to use it. Just make sure that you attribute people necessary. So who am I? No one of consequence. Nobody here has watched Princess Bride? There we go. All right. So I did all of this stuff, but that's the technical stuff. More importantly, I started down this journey where I started looking at how do I do things with teams. Early on in my career, which is, years ago, I was focused on doing things myself. And then over the last 15 years, I've started looking at how do I build things using people. It's become a passion. It's become something that's somewhat defined me, especially in the last 10 years. Seriously? Odd crowd. Okay. I've had a lot of success, but I've also made a lot of mistakes. I'll give you, for instance, this was, and I think this is a success. I'm not sure. But it was eye-opening just how much I had transformed when I was characterized more as a team builder than as a product builder. So I'm just showing this, and maybe it'll give some inkling into why I was asked to talk. We're going to go through each one of these in detail. I want to share a couple notes on how we get there. But maybe the most important thing, and why I did choose the Princess Bride reference, is that a lot of times we have the need to seek a false appeal to authority, and I don't want you to do that. Pay attention to what I say. What I've done really isn't what should guide you, as with most things in life. So probably the most important thing is we're in this moment where we're being asked the question what it is that it means to be diverse and to be together, those two contradictory values. It's come to a point where, even 2 years ago, it's not uncommon to have people yelling epithets on the subway at each other. It's not uncommon to see in group settings us questioning some fundamental ideals that we have about what we think is right and what we think is wrong. These contradictions have been something that really made me think closely about what that means. I want to share that story and my journey through that with you. And also, as we work through this, I'm going to share with you a theory, and I'll talk about this in a moment, that has guided, especially in the last 2 years, my thinking around groups. So, first of all, let's talk a little bit. Does everybody know Alan Perlis? Everybody's heard of Perlis, the great mathematician, computer scientist? This is worth reading. I don't normally read from slides, but I'm going to do it here. I think that it's extraordinarily important that we in computer science keep fun in computing. When it started out, it was an awful lot of fun. Of course, the paying customers got shafted out every now and then, and after a while, we began to take their complaints seriously. We began to feel as if we were really responsible for the successful, error-free, perfect use of these machines. I don't think we are. I think we're responsible for stretching them, setting them off in new directions, and keeping fun in the house. I hope the field of computer science never loses its fun. And as with all things Perlis, this is only the preamble. Above all, I hope we don't become missionaries. Don't feel as if you're Bible salesmen. The world has too many of those already. What you know about computing, other people will learn. Don't feel as if the key to successful computing is only in your hands. What's in your hands, I think and hope, is intelligence. The ability to see the machine as more than when you were first led up to it, that you can make it more. One of the themes that you hear many times now is there are several 100,000 more jobs, for instance, in deep learning and AI, than we actually have people to staff. I am continually mystified that something that is as simple and straightforward to learn as machine learning is held up as this holy grail that nobody can approach. And when we look back, even in my career over the last 25 years, this has constantly been a theme. There's always the thing that nobody will be able to learn, nobody will be able to conquer. And yet consistently we're proven wrong. This elitism has led to perhaps some short-term thinking that really hurts us both as a community and as a profession. My concern is that at a moment like this, when we are asked the question, diversity, unity, anything that does not provide inclusivity, whether it is by learning, by effort, by the sweat of our brow, must be something that we must question earnestly. So why am I here? In researching for this talk, I went back. I take, as my friends tell me, ridiculous quantities of notes. And as I went through my own notes on September 28, 2016, I don't remember what was going on the day. I have a rough idea of what was happening. I found clarity wedged between my jottings, and this frequently happens. You know, there's that lead up, and it's only in retrospect you look back and go, that made sense. I'd like to share that with you today. And I hope that it shows up here. Don't worry, I zoom in. Is that legible roughly for you? Okay. In the front, yes. In the back, no. Don't worry, I zoom in. Okay? So the subject of the conversation was that I had been asked multiple times two things. What was my management and leadership philosophy, and what made engineering teams successful? By this point, I had had what I'd consider, I guess, some reasonable successes, some catastrophic failures. No laugh for that, seriously. Thank you. And it was enough for me to stop and think to myself, well, what is it that really defines me? And when I started off, I thought it was this, right? This was just basically, I don't know if you can read it there, but it is, you know, a series of what I'd say to be conventional or reasonably conventional thoughts. I thought they were special, so I was like, oh yeah, that's great. You know, there's my leadership model, like how do you actually structure your day? The practice of the craft, so how do you manage a team of 60 with 15 minutes every morning, right? How do you create routines that let you check the outputs and move on to your day? How do you have discussions? How do you structure engineering teams? How do you allow OKRs, things like this? But I wasn't very happy with what I saw, and every time I told people this, they said it wasn't cohesive. So I actually started asking myself some more questions. And I know you can't, well, the people in front can read it, but for the benefit of folks in the back, at the time I was spinning up a number of new teams, 4 teams as I recall. And the real question was, you know, how do you spin up a new team? How do you influence and evolve teams? How do you foster an inclusive, data-driven, self-organizing, self-managing culture? Lots of buzzwords, by the way, but each of them has a specific meaning, right? And on and on. And one of the things that I noticed, can everybody at least see that? The little squiggly thing with circles, spirals? So that's a hub and a spoke, right? And we see this all the time. It has, I would imagine, some good structural reasons to be formed, but really it has some problematic properties, especially when you try and scale teams. So a hub and spoke works in the following way. You know, it starts off maybe 2 people, you know, starting off a new company. You take care of the coding, I'll take care of the sales, and we develop specializations. We decide, okay, well, we're going to hire a couple other people, and then they end up, you know, if you're not careful, more of a supporting cast. And unless we surface the structures and the ideas that we have, we end up with this sinkhole of knowledge. Even more than that, there are certain aspects of our culture that mythologize the great person. I don't know if there's anybody in this room that wants to be a great person. I probably wouldn't hire you. I'm joking, relax. So, hubs and spokes become toxic after a while, because you start to wonder what happens if this person gets run over. It's always appealing at the beginning. I mean, it feels nice. You walk through the corridors and people are like, gee, I wonder what Graham will say. I wonder what Bill will say. I wonder what Jane will say. But kind of after a while it starts to chafe. It sucks to be the hub and it sucks to be the spoke, right? It also means that I'm isolating knowledge, I'm isolating design decisions, I'm isolating knowledge, and I'm actually preventing my team from scaling. I would also say that I'm also creating, if I build teams like this, really an inherent hierarchy, an inherent diversity in a way that we don't want, right? So in other words, I'm making sure that only certain people get rewarded. I'm making sure that there's a stratification in how we build that team. The rewards will naturally go toward the hub. And while there are cases where this is necessary, I had to ask myself, 10 years ago, and then especially, apparently, on the 28th of September 2016, why that happened, and could we purposefully, deliberately, do something different? And then the next question was, what made engineering teams successful? And I mean, the thing to remember here is that I'm not asking what makes companies successful. By the way, that's the answer. This is a slow crowd. All right. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. So what makes engineering teams successful, right? Ability to ship, ability to meet deadlines, such as they are, ability to create innovative products, incorporating new technologies, new capabilities, new opportunities, and be able to create opportunities at scale, and on and on and on, right? But what I found interesting as I went over, both in these notes and as I was doing my research, is that there wasn't anything directly related to culture, good or otherwise, all right? And it also didn't seem strongly correlated with diversity. By that I mean we can look around, I don't mean in this room, and you can see companies that are toxic, but they're doing well. You can see teams that seem to be very unpleasant to work at, but they're shipping. They're coming up with something innovative. Now you might look at that and say, well, that sounds very cynical and horrible, but I look at it and I saw enough diversity that I saw an opportunity. In other words, if there wasn't any strong correlation, it means for us as leaders that we have a choice, right? We have a reason that we can go after. So, let's break this down a little bit. And we're going to take a step back because I do want to show a little bit of my thought processes here, and hopefully it doesn't offend you too much. Wow. I'm trying. I'm throwing and you guys aren't buying. So we're going to talk about a study of forms, and I'll explain why in a minute, and also about criticism. Because we're going to look at a system and a series of systems, and we're going to critique them. And that means that, never a sure thing, always an uneven path. We have to be careful how we critique things. Then we're going to dive right into understanding the dynamics of groups of people. And then finally, I'm going to share an example, which some of you may already know, which is the example of apocalypses and how we change how we talk to each other. So, first one, setting the stage. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. The slides will be up and you can read this afterwards. But probably the most important thing when we talk about form, to give you a little bit of an unnecessary history lesson, but it will be fun. And it's 5 o'clock on a Saturday, so we'll do it anyway. At the turn of the last century, Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead defined the Principia Mathematica and wrote the Principia Mathematica, and in it they created symbolic forms. And while it is true that Gödel came along later and unseated all of that as well as many other things, they defined forms. And it's not really anything new, but it's a useful way to imagine problems, especially unstructured problems like we have when we imagine what happens in a large group of people. So for the purposes of this talk, we're going to talk about forms as being primary and secondary forms. By that I mean you'll go into various groups of people and they'll talk about, oh yeah, we certainly collaborate. Collaboration's part of who we are. We fail fast. We add X. But the important thing that we want to make a distinction on is what is a primary form. So we have a thing, and then there are different forms. But within a specific frame of reference, and in our frame of reference, it is how do I put these groups of people together, which is the primary form and which is the secondary form. And this has a great effect on how we shape groups. In other words, if I say that collaboration is the primary form of a group, that means that I actually find ways and means so that people are incentivized to seek answers together first, before they seek answers by themselves. The next thing is on criticism. And for those of you who haven't read C.S. Lewis's essay on criticism, I urge you to read it. Has everybody heard of C.S. Lewis? Yeah? There's one yes. Everybody had bad childhoods. Nobody read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Good enough. Okay, so Lewis was faced with a number of criticisms, and he had to ask himself, why were what he considered to be unfair criticisms targeted at him? And what I would say is the following. He wrote this essay, and this essay was something that I feel really applies so much today. And it's going to apply to what we talk about as well, about how we think about a particular text. And I don't use his language here. I use the what and the why. But he used the formal cause and the efficient cause. In looking at a text, he defined the formal cause. What does the text actually say? What did I write? He also made a distinction of the efficient cause. Why did I write it? What was in the author's mind? What brought them to this point? Too frequently today, we find ourselves looking at a piece of text and not really examining what it says, worrying ourselves about the why. Even more than that, really conflating the two. So taking the why and making it part of what it is. And here's the trick. The why of why human beings do things is an uncertain path at best. So, in this talk, we're going to concern ourselves primarily with the what. Okay? What is it that we're trying to say? This is why I was telling you, don't pay attention to me. Hopefully what I'm telling you is something that you'll be able to parse and take away and actually use for yourselves. Okay? So, with that preamble, let's talk about understanding the dynamics of groups. So, as I was puzzling through all of this, I wondered to myself, is it possible to apply basic organizational theory and psychology to the questions that I was having? Remember, questions like, how do I spin up a new group? How do I influence them? How do I keep them organic, self-driven, self-managing? And so I drew this. And don't worry, I'm going to help you through that. This was my fusion of, Foucault, basic organizational theory, Drucker. I actually don't know, it was September? I mean, I can say I was probably smoking weed at the time, but I can say that now, right? All right. But the interesting thing is that after I drew this, I found that a lot of the odd behavior that I saw in us, in human beings, I could suddenly explain. I had a rationale for, right? I want to be clear here. The evidence that I'm referring to is anecdotal. When I say anecdotal, I don't mean that I saw no evidence, but it certainly didn't approach statistical significance. Where it does, I'll tell you. But it was very, very informative because it gave me a way to actually structure my thoughts and my policies. So, fine. So here is our person, the focal point. And just structurally, so we'll draw the structure. 2 people is a dyad, 3 people, a triad, many people, a social network. Yeah, not Facebook. This theory actually predates Facebook. And when we look at a network, we'll define the network by who knows who and what information or function flows over a given network. Okay? We also will say that for every network, we're going to restrain it to a single function. Okay? And that means that when we look at a group of people, we can actually isolate them and create multiple networks that they identify with. So say, for instance, we have a network of people who understand Python. That's one. Right? We have a network of people who are in finance. That's another one. Right? And so forth and so forth. So we have a layered network model. Okay? So that gives us our structural basis. So then from here, human beings tend to have primary groups and secondary groups. So you have like a single primary group, something that identifies you as a human. This is what is tied to your identity. Then you have multiple secondary groups. People tend to join groups for 2 reasons. One, because of the leadership of the group, and the second one, because of function. So function would be instrumental, so focused on doing things. An organic group might spring up if, for instance, the chandelier falls. Sorry. And then we all rush over and say, hey, let's help them move the chandelier and, guide people. I'm sorry, folks. And that would be a task-oriented group, solely focused on moving things. An emotional group would be one that fulfills an emotional need. You have a love of whatever, right? I'm clearly not very emotional. My wife tells me it all the time. These are not mutually exclusive, which means that it's not to say that people will join a group and the only reason will be task-oriented or will be emotional. When it comes to leadership, we look at leadership. Are you guys able to at least see, right? Okay, good. So when we look at leadership, we talk about the scope. Is it centralized or decentralized leadership? Function. Is it instrumental or is it expressive? Tied back to the function need that we had before, we can see is leadership tied to making sure that things are getting done, or is it tied to promoting emotional strength and security? The style of leadership, is it democratic? Is it laissez-faire? Is it authoritarian? Laissez-faire being another name for lazy, which is exactly the type of leader that I am. Don't laugh. Laziness is like one of the best qualities ever. Ask Larry Wall. So, the interesting thing here is that instrumental and expressive, the combination of these two is essential. All right? So in other words, it seems like if you're going to be a really good leader, you have to be able to provide psychological safety as well as give people tasks, help them identify what the task should be and so forth, give them circumstances to do it, or so it would seem. So then from here, the really interesting part, when you look at the diversity of groups, is the axis of control in groups. So groups function, by axis of control, I mean controlling membership, controlling behavior, happens everywhere, happens today, I'm sure, all right? And we look at exclusion and conformity, which guide confirmation, selection, sample biases, all these things. This is an interesting point. Groups will hear and process the same information in very different ways. One of the reasons why social studies are generally I'm leery to say there's anything stronger than anecdotal evidence is because reproducing results sometimes you neglect variables and it becomes very difficult to actually say, yeah, 100% that's true. However, I'm actually going to leave the years out, but many years ago, I had read about a result that I then decided to try and reproduce, and it was as simple as this. You can go out and try this yourselves. We were having a design meeting. Going into the design meeting, there was a junior, a co-op, and there was a senior. They both took cue cards and wrote on the cue cards a design proposition. I want to be clear here, this design proposition was exactly the same. Said exactly the same in both. When they went in, 15 minutes into the meeting, the junior read the cue card and was largely ignored. 15 minutes later, the senior read the cue card. It's like, wow, that's a fantastic idea. What an amazing thing. But that wasn't the kicker. At the end of the meeting, we held up the cue cards and showed them. You know what they said? They were like, no, yeah. They read it differently. They had to read it. It was completely different. It was totally, dude, the same card. No, there was this determined air that something else had happened. We call this post-rationalization bias, right? This is actually one of the key things that we have to look out for and try and minimize. We do this all the time. For me, it was a humbling moment because I realized that I do the same thing. We all do. There's nothing special about any of us that says that we're not going to do it. It happens all the time. We are lucky enough to create circumstances where it is obvious. So then as we look into inclusion, we get to the reference group. So a reference group is what we compare ourselves to. And this can be either positive, I want to be like this person, or this type of person, or negative, there's no way I want to be like this person. All right? The inclusion is what we use to actually build in-groups and out-groups. All right? So how we actually, by comparison, see ourselves and other members of the group as either part of the included group or people that are excluded. All right? And this is where we get into the post-rationalization bias. We exposed in that bias a case where people actually were thinking to themselves, oh yeah, this person is part of the group. They know, they have the context, they're part of us. And this other person is not. So my question here, as I work through all of this was, as I look at these contradictions in this bias, can these things be minimized? And this was the first time that I actually started thinking hard about what experiments I would run. And so this is the first of many pages, and what I did was that I built out several models that would be used to build groups. And for each one, I had a different theory, right? So in other words, as I form these groups, are there different ways that I can position the group, that I can actually shape how they think. And in the first one, don't worry, I took in particular look at this. So this is tied to, so earlier on, I was talking about how groups go from 1 to 2 to 3 to networks. And how they grow, there's a growth function, lambda, and there is a threshold analysis that we do as they move through. So groups tend to go from formation, we're just getting together, to selection, where there's initiation bias, then cohesion, we're all together, then expansion, and then what's either called stability or dogma, okay? And you'll hear people use the very dumbed down forming, storming, norming, all right? Which is an appropriate heuristic, but neglects some of these steps. And so as I was looking at the formation, my thought was, is it possible to actually affect the group first and foremost with the selection? And I have this written here. So an ideal selection process reduces the value of the acceptance criteria. Overvalued membership causes the distortion of the merits of selection in the first place and implies that the hiring and onboarding processes we use need to minimize the overall value of the group. Right? So just think about that. Contrary to what your mom and dad told you, you're not a special snowflake. Thank you. So every time you hear, we hire only the best X, I had a different word up here, but I was told to minimize the swearing. But you can figure it out, right? And this was proven, let me give you a little bit more of history. One of the early teams that I built, we were actually, I would say, we had fairly ridiculous hiring standards. So the core group was 4 PhDs and their students. In order to join, we actually stated that you needed a PhD or a postdoc. You needed to be able to code. You had to be, in line with the bunnies and the Care Bears. You had to. I'm like asking for every laugh here. This is really hard. So the thing was, we actually didn't find people. It was this enormous effort to actually find people. And one of the eye-opening things for me was seeing one of my good friends actually building teams alongside me. I mean, their product was slightly less complicated, or so I thought. And they actually scaled up to like 100 people while I was struggling to get to 50. And so I ran an experiment. And the experiment was that I hired 2 people who didn't have any experience, didn't understand anything about the domain that they were coming into. And instead I changed how I looked at it, and I said, if I can bring these people up to speed, I'm ahead of the game. I can actually make a difference. I call these people my Frankensteins. And I've successfully Frankenstein many people since then. This is an important distinction. You remember when I was talking about the talent gap earlier? Hundreds of thousands of people. I think Gartner said 151,000 jobs, and Forrester said 200,000, and I think somebody else said 300,000 as we race to a formulation of a gap which we will never fill, right? And so you have to ask yourself, is it something that we actually don't want to accept? That if we don't allow people to come in to our groups, if we don't say, you know what, this is actually democratic as a first form of a group. So can I structure a group where the first form is learning, where the first form is performance, where the first form is making sure that they collaborate and help each other learn? Can that happen? And can I confront in doing it all of the different toxic, antithetical anti-patterns that will come up? Because I know you're thinking, but they're stupid. Why should I have to talk to stupid people? Right? Right? You can say yes. This is a safe space. So to give you for instance, a lot of technology companies have really detailed technical interviews. I'm sure some of you in here have detailed technical interviews. Maybe some of you have businesses around that hiring. Right? Yeah? I mean, maybe I'd get every job. This is a huge head. But here's the thing. Having done the analysis myself, and again, when I say not rigorous, it means this is like for 2 companies, for a few hundred employees, not what I'd call rigorous or statistically significant, but what I found interesting was when I did this analysis, so take all your interviews and I tie them to the success of the hiring company. Do they hire, so we hire somebody, do they do well here, meet the selection criteria, and then do they do well somewhere else? And what we found was that the best selection criteria was the manager's screening call, 15 minutes. And even more than that, it was not a great predictor. And the important thing to remember here is that we like to think that selection criteria is only the explicit things we put in place. But selection criteria is everything, right? It's the culture that we form. It's how we talk to people. It's the perks we give them. It's what happens when they come into the office at the first time. It's how they see other people behaving. All of these are the selection criteria. And so here's the reason why I think most of those hiring things are bullshit. Bullshit. And it is this. If I were to tell you that you had a test to take tomorrow and that test decided the rest of your life, well, you'd tell me I was an idiot, wouldn't you? Or you'd be British. Yes, I did A-levels. A couple of British people in here, awesome. So the whole point, though, is that that's an inane way to measure people. That's how you actually reinforce any structural biases in a system. And that's why anytime I see these hiring sites, I just recognize they're garbage out of hand, right? The other fundamental flaw is that we somehow seem to believe that past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. Yes, if all of the criteria remain constant, right? So yeah, I think if I leave you in whatever great, horrible, mediocre, humdrum job, all of your conditions remain the same, yes, that is true. And it starts to unearth the real challenge that we have in front of us, which is that if you are in tech, if you are in knowledge, if you are in our industry, we must be in the job of changing people's circumstances, and not in a trivial, silly, I watched billions on Tuesday way, right? It means that we have to actually be looking to enable people. And I'm not talking about grand, overarching changes. I'm talking about small things like how you work with people, who you choose to hire, who you give a chance to, who you decide that you're going to help understand the problem. When you face that urge of, oh my God, I'm working with somebody and I can't believe they can't get this right. So what I realized in explaining all of this and everything else, I'll give you guys the cliff notes, was that what makes it successful? It's the group. It's the members of the group. It's how well the group adheres to its selection criteria and how well they fit together. And the important thing here is that this is my theory borne out by this anecdotal, I would say strong anecdotal, but still anecdotal evidence, is that fit is not about good or bad. It is similar to evolutionary fit, okay? And that means that fit can be defined as what allows people to succeed. It isn't toxic, non-toxic, whatever other buzzword, self-managing, any of those things. I guess the thing that really hit me is that it's none of those, right? It really is how well people cope with the selection criteria. So imagine this. This means that if you want to build a great team, the primary thing, and I realize that I'm probably disenfranchising, if you guys take me seriously, I'm disenfranchising several management speakers, because they'll come up here and tell you, I have the thing. This is the way you build great teams. And that, again, is bullshit, right? Because seriously, it's Saturday. You can clap harder for bullshit than that. How you build great teams according to the delivery is that you can apply a clear, opinionated way of leading. That's it. That's it. That's the quote-unquote secret. What sauce you choose to buy afterwards is up to you, right? What drug you choose is up to you. But I think you should no longer deceive yourselves and think, oh yeah, this is the one way. So the first time I told a good friend this, she looked at me and she was like, but that seems so hopeless, so terrible. Isn't that rooted in cynicism and skepticism? And I say to you, no, it isn't. It means that you can decide what the values are. You can decide to build that diverse team. You can make it succeed, and nobody can tell you otherwise. That means that everybody telling you the hierarchies are the only possible team structure, that titles define people, that there is no other way to grow teams, you can tell them that's bullshit. You can tell them Graham Toppin told you so. Actually, you can look at the theory. I will publish all of my notes. Take a look, form it, hack it, change it to your own version. To me, this was incredibly liberating because it meant that I could actually make different teams succeed in ways that actually produce larger social good. And that made me feel pretty good. So for example, things that you can put in. Let's do a small smorgasbord. You can talk about what time people get into work. So to give you a for instance, at one company that I built a team for, I said we're going to do 9 to 6. And I said 9 to 6? Why not 9 to 5? And I said because if I do 9 to 5, then if I want to take a long walk or a coffee in the afternoon, I don't get any work done afterwards. See what I did there? No? It also led to some fairly entertaining interviews because interviews actually become easier. So I actually, a good friend of mine, Farhan actually had this attitude that technical interviews are garbage, and I want to be clear here, they are. But I also don't believe that interviews are completely useless. Given this framework, interviews are helpful because you allow people to self-select out. So to give you a for instance, and I can't make this stuff up, oh my God, I was interviewing somebody and I told them 9 to 6, and the person went, oh, it means I have to get up at 6, and then and they walked through their whole morning and then said, so can I just start at 12? And to be fair, the other thing, once you devalue the group, is that you actually say to them, you know what, there are tons of other places you can work where maybe that'll happen. Not here, but there are places. And you can actually, here's the important thing, you can say that without actually making them feel like, oh my God, they're missing out on something. Because the non-urgency of a group, there are so many jobs, there are so many places that you can go, right? You miss one, there'll be another one. Is there pairing? Is there not pairing? If you care about things like that. Unlimited vacation. Side note, I'm totally a fan of unlimited vacation. And I do mean real unlimited vacation, like forcing people to take anywhere from 4 weeks to 3 months every couple of years to just get out of the office and go play. Yeah, seriously, one person with that? Because let's face it, life is short. You were shaped by experiences. When I was years old, in 2001, my boss let me take, 2 months to go to Spain to Italy. And I packed up with, a notebook and not my girlfriend and went for a while. And it was one of those formative experiences. And I remember that sort of stuck in my mind as, oh my God, the world didn't burn down. And we kept things going. I mean, the important thing there is that when people talk about unlimited vacation is, one, it shouldn't be a management trick. And two, it shouldn't be an excuse for you not to work. And here's the rule that you hear all this buzz about unlimited vacation's a trick, we'll tell them this and that way we can minimize our liability and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, if you give people a great place to work and you actually tell them how to build in downtime, you get far more productivity out of them, right? Work-life balance. Work-life balance, compensation, mythology. People always have the mythology, right? The mythology, by the way, is about sketching for people the why. Why do they come in? Why is it that you're going to come to work every day? And if you're at a job today where you walk in, the only reason you're going into the job is because job, I hope you have a good life to go home to afterwards. If not, come talk to me afterwards and we'll get you hooked up. And on and on. All right, so that's that part. Now I want to show you for my next trick. I want to show you an example of hacking how we talk to each other. And the interesting thing is that this, like with many of the others, you may think that I'm slightly crazy drawing all of these diagrams and coming up with theories, lines and boxes and things like this, but they actually prove very useful. It's a great way to think. I'm not telling you have to think like me, God knows, but I am telling you that you should not be afraid to formulate your own theories and test them. This is the only freedom that we really have as human beings, is what is in our minds. So, hacking how we think. This particular method of talking came up many years ago when I was, it's amazing that I'm old enough to say many years ago, side note, but I can say 2 decades ago with a straight face. So, to the 3-decade people in here, don't worry, I'm catching up with you very quickly. And to the 1-decade ones, I hate all of you. The situation was as follows. We were trying to have deep technical conversations, and we were dealing with a few different prickly communities, MySQL and Postgres communities, and we were trying to find ways that we could actually have deep, difficult technical conversations in ways that were productive, didn't make people scared about having the conversations in the first place, and we came up with this. So Conways Law. Everybody here knows Conways Law, right? It's old hat at this point. Yes? By clap, who knows Conways Law? Fine, okay, only some of you. That was very weak. You should know Conway's Law. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of those organizations. So what does that mean? It's colloquially stated as the structure of the product will follow the structure of the team. All right? So for instance, if you have good communication between people, you'll have good communication between components and so forth. So, to give you a for instance, if you go into a team and it's like a monolith, you can think to yourself, oh my God, how am I possibly going to ever break apart this monolith? And you can have long, pointless architectural conversations about that. Or you can just break apart the teams, right? Miracles will follow. I give you that one for free, right? Nothing? Okay. So good interfaces give good design and good architecture. So here's the problem with groups. When we get bigger, it's difficult to scale a conversation. So you get 10 people in a room, people don't feel included, new ideas are discouraged, and our old limitations are entrenched. So, we ask ourselves, how do we solve this? How do you get into a room where you actually have to innovate and make sure everybody's heard? So we came up with the apocalypse, and no, not apocalypse now, but apocalypse, from those of you who've read your Bible, the Revelation. Right? And Perl 6, but we actually got this done. Okay. I'm sorry, I actually love Perl, and I love Perl 6, but I love Python too. Simple process for sharing ideas. It's used to manage everything from open source initiatives to large-scale enterprise products. Mike DiBernardo over at Wave has used Apocalypse, as he's over there in the corner. Hi, Mike. He's used apocalypses to manage change, like large change management between people, which I found fascinating. He also changed it from an on-site model into a distributed model where not everybody had to be in the same room. By the way, this framework is meant to be hacked. There are certain rules. All you need to do is deliberately change them, and you're going to be able to make it work the way you want. So the basic idea is that we want to formalize how we talk about hard things and make it lightweight, inclusive, and repeatable. So to give you a for instance, one of the reasons why people don't like large architectural meetings, or any large meeting, anytime somebody puts me into a big meeting, I think my point of view is that I say, we say, okay, well, let's go talk about it for 6 hours. And my answer is no. And they say, They say, why? And I say, because then the person with the biggest bladder will win. So we want to make it lightweight, we want to make it inclusive, and we want to make it repeatable. Hard things, like I told you, what database do we use? How do we change the schema? Should Mike get his bonus this year? So when we look at this, we look at roles, okay? The basic structure starts with 4 roles. There's a timekeeper, there's a presenter, a note taker, and an apocalypse lead. The content of an apocalypse is always focused on a single idea and problem. So bear with me. The reason we do that is because, remember, it's lightweight, it's inclusive. We don't try and boil the ocean. So we want to make it possible to say, hey, you guys talk about this idea, you guys talk about this idea, we'll come back and we'll figure it out together. When somebody is speaking, they're not interrupted while they're presenting. This is one of the hard and fast rules. There are no restrictions or limitations on what you can or cannot say other than time. When a speaker is presenting, the note taker cannot comment. When we're doing question and answer, the note taker cannot comment. They have to actually write. And nothing is sacred. So, high level. We start an apocalypse with a theme. Right? For instance, we want to increase throughput. One person leads the theme. Everyone takes a turn presenting, with the exception of the lead, and everyone takes a turn taking notes. For each presenter, we nominate a timekeeper, and we choose a note taker. In these 2 parameters, which can be changed, you say, okay, we're going to take 10 minutes to present, no interruptions, and then 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A, and everyone can and should speak, except for the note taker. The lead, and it's important to note, within the apocalypse, we don't have the notion of lead as what you might think of. The lead is never responsible for proposing a solution. The lead is responsible for capturing all ideas, comments, and notes. They will go away, create a proposal based on what the group has said, because remember, we have notes, full notes of the entire session. And the leader also makes sure that the process is followed. So this is like the police, you do this. This was a great way to think about things because the leader now is the servant leader. The leader is in service of the entire group, right? As a leader, your whole job is to make sure that you listen. So you propose the problem, you listen, and then you come back with the proposal. The group, by the way, can then say yay or nay to the proposal. When the proposal comes back, everybody has a chance to buy in. Every idea is given fair attention. The lead can change from apocalypse to apocalypse. Probably they should, right? So what does this look like? So here's a first presenter. So 1 to 8 people is the team. 5 is presenting in this thing. Can you guys see the numbers? Yeah? Yep. Yeah? 6 is the timekeeper, 7 is the note taker, 8 the theme lead. Then we change it. Here's the second presenter, right? And so forth. So what does this look like in actuality? Hey, cool animation, right? Yeah. So the nice thing about this is that it means that we can actually have a meaningful conversation, and we can say it will take n minutes. We'll walk out of the n minutes with an artifact, a document, which actually captures exactly what we talked about. If you keep a library of all the documents, it means that you actually have, when it comes time for shred or IRAP or any of those other things, you can just tell the consultants, leave me alone, here are my notes, which is a great feeling, right? It also means that every time someone presents, they're forced to talk. It means that the quiet people actually have a way and a forum to talk. When someone goes up to present, you may be asking yourself, well, what if I don't understand the problem? In general, there are 3 types of presentations, right? Someone can ask a question, right? So they can actually say, can you please clarify what was said? They can restate the problem, or they can propose a solution. Because it's lightweight, what happens is that if you actually have a critical mass of apocalypses, so 6 people can have an apocalypse with presentation time of 5 and a question time of 2, right? In approximately 45 minutes if we factor in startup and shutdown time. And then they can do it again. The leader can take the notes, aggregate them, do it again, and do it again. And this is a great way to converge very rapidly on ideas, and all of a sudden, no one can dominate the conversation. So in other words, you have a conversation, I don't have to listen to Graham talk for 40 minutes again, and oh my God, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Right? It also means that, the quiet people, who, by the way, often have fantastic ideas, the new ideas get to surface, okay? And that's really important. So you'll note similarities here. We call this Pareto fairness, and that's where we were looking at, overall fairness versus overall welfare. And that means we're not trying to create a completely fair system, but one which overall is fair. It's great when you're seeding conversations, like just starting off and you're not sure where to start. It's great to bootstrap it and get it going. Yeah. And I actually have further examples and blog posts which I'll publish as well. All right. That's it. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.